Hello, Internet. This is Chavez and Valko, the key to your immigration solutions. My name is Ben Hamilton. I'm a senior associate here. I manage the employment-based practice. With me is Andrew Craven, associate attorney at Chavez and Valko. And today we're going to just talk about a hot topic, and it is the hottest of hot topics, and that is, will there be a second H-1B lottery? Some of those questions you're seeing all over Twitter, all over Reddit. People are nervous. For some, it may be their last shot, and they want to know, is there going to be a second lottery, and potentially, how big is it going to be? So we're going to discuss our thoughts and opinions, maybe some numbers, and hopefully give people an idea maybe what to expect. But again, this is all speculation. Andrew, but first, tell us, what is the H-1B lottery?
So basically, every year, uh, you enter, in the last couple of years, we've seen them start the registration process. So basically, you throw in your passport information and then the petitioning company's information, just the basics, pay a whopping $10 fee. And then they run a random selection, pick who can actually file their petition, and select basically which workers will potentially get their H-1B.
So how many H-1Bs get selected each year?
So each year the actual number selected to petition varies, but the grand total actually gets approved is 85,000.
And this year, how many registrations did we have?
So this year, the registrations were 308,613.
So we have 308,000 for 85,000 slots. Of course, there are 20,000 of those 85,000 are set aside for people with U.S. master's degrees. So it is a random lottery. The only way to have better odds is to have a U.S. master's degree, because then you essentially get two bites at the apple. So the question is, we've already run the lottery for this year, 308,000 registrants. They selected 87,500 people. The question is, are you going to be second lottery? So let's kind of look at the numbers. This is going to help us kind of know what we're looking at here. So we're looking at how many submissions or registrations there were in previous years, right? So we see 2016, 232, 2017, 236. The numbers start to dip. That would be the Trump effect. The Trump administration started to very aggressively go after H-1Bs. If you look to the right column, you'll see the denial rate going from, this is the denial rate for initial H-1B petitions. The overall denial rate, including like extensions and stuff, is actually lower. But you'll see that you can kind of see a correlation between the denial rate going up and the number of submissions going down. Now, in previous years, right, everybody submitted their full H-1B petition on April 1st. There was no registration process. So when you see in 2016 there was 232,000 submissions, they submitted, or so people mailed in on April 1st 232 full applications, right, with all the forms, all the filing fees. USCIS then conducted the lottery, kept the cases they selected, and then sent back the ones they weren't going to adjudicate. Obviously, the last couple of years have been different, where people registered in March, found out if they were selected, and then had 90 days to submit their full case. So if you look here in terms of total selected, again, we're talking about there's 85,000 spots, but you see in 2016, 97,000 selected, 2017, 95,000 selected. You can kind of see there's a correlation between denial rates and the number selected going up. So, Andrew, just speaking historically, what is one of the sort of reasons that they actually select more people than there are slots?
So are we talking since 2016 or are we talking those last 2 years?
We're talking historically, 2016 to like 2019.
I mean, historically, they'd select more because ultimately even if someone won the lottery system, so basically just your number got picked, there's still the possibility for denial. Maybe you don't qualify, maybe the position doesn't qualify, or any other number of issues that can come up and end in a denial. So you select, say, looking at 2016, 97 plus thousand, you're expecting a certain number of those to get denied so that you get down to the 85,000 visas that you actually have.
Yeah, and you can see over there how it's 97, 95, 95, and then jumps up to 110. And of course, if you look at the denial rates, it goes 10, 13, jumps to 24. So you can see that there's like a correlation between, oh, hey, if we're denying more cases, we have to select more cases, right? They also factor in, I think this is a less of a factor, but they also factor in that there are going to be people that withdraw, right? Where the job opportunity went away and the employer was going to withdraw the application, and they look at their historical data to know about how many that would be. So I would say in previous years, this was largely impacted by sort of withdrawals and denial rates, right? And so we see that on average, the 5-year average, that they selected about 101,000 petitions to get to 85, right? That's kind of the average, 101,000, which means about 48% of the cases that were submitted were ultimately selected or that were submitted or registered. Last year was just the craziest year, right? And of course, this largely had to do to two factors. One you referenced was the moving to a registration system where the only barrier to entry is $10. That's it. Again, previously people had to cut checks for all the filing fees, pay the attorney, completely fill out everything, and submit cases, right? So there was a much higher barrier to entry to get your sort of hat into the lottery. But the last couple of years, it's just been $10. So in 2021, right, we see that the number of registrations jumped significantly, right, from 200,000 to 274,000, right? Huge jump, again, because of that low barrier to entry. But USCIS, right out of the gate, selected 106,000. Right out of the gate, round one, 106,000, right? They selected way more than they normally would in the previous years. And you have to say that that was probably in large part due to COVID. They probably saw the writing on the wall and were like, hey, probably a lot of these between from when there's selection to when the 90 days they have to actually submit their case, there's probably a lot of people who are going to get selected that are not going to submit cases, right? Also at that time, we were still seeing the sort of like surging denial rates. The denial rates, again, in late 2019 were still pretty high. We're looking at 21%. They didn't really start to drop until the back half of 2020, when there was a big settlement agreement between USCIS. It's called the IT Serve Alliance. And then they rescinded a bunch of memos, and then you see the denial rate just plummeted after that. But Andrew, last year, was there a second round?
Yes. So last year, I mean, we got the numbers up there. Around August, I want to say we started receiving notices that some of the folks we had registered that were not initially selected got selected. And I guess that total number was about 18,315.
Yeah, so we didn't receive any official notice. The way we knew is because obviously when you register through your myUSCIS account, and obviously if something updates in your myUSCIS account, you get an email. So what happened is in August, we just started getting emails. And we were like, what? A case was updated? What case? And we had to log in and we started like digging around and we're like, what case? And then it took a little bit. And then all of a sudden we noticed, oh, wait a second, somebody here has a selection notice. And that's when we realized, oh, wait, some of our people have been selected. And then we had, of course, 90 days to submit our case. So we see that they did a round one that was 106. They did a round two that was 18 for a total of 124. Obviously, that is the highest by far. The highest before that was 110. And that's when the denial rates were like skyrocketing. So the number of total selections, 124,000, was really high. Ironically, if you look at the percentage, it's actually kind of in line with the percentage, right? It was 45%, which if you see historically, the average is around 48. So this year, 308,000 registrants, right? Again, new record of registrants. So we were kind of expecting that their round one would look maybe a little bit more like last year, that it would be like 106. Instead, it was super low, 87,500. Andrew, what did you think when you saw that number?
I mean, I was just shocked in general. And I think one of the other factors that we talked about is just seeing more people double register, or, seeing tweets where people talk about having 12 registrations filed for them. I really expected the initial round to be higher than, last year by at least a little bit.
Yeah, so why did USCIS go with such a low number? I mean, there's two things that from their end they're looking at, right? One, they're kind of saying, well, the pandemic is, not as big of a factor this year as it was last year, right? So they're thinking that most of the people who registered and get selected are actually going to submit a case. Also, the denial rates have plummeted. The most recent number I think we have on denial rates is I think we have the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2020, and it was 1.5%, which is super low, right? So maybe looking at, hey, denial rates are way down because we got rid of those memos and there was that settlement agreement. We have a new administration, so denial rates are just plummeting. COVID's over, 87,500. But as you said, that means they completely and utterly ignored a major, major problem. That if you've been paying attention to this space, you've been looking again like at Reddit and Twitter and those places, you've seen a lot of anger. Anger when you see a tweet from somebody bragging that, hey, I registered 12 times and was selected 8. And you're like, what? Is that legal? Andrew, is that legal?
Super questionable, I'd say. Because, I mean, we know, like, you can't say have one company get different entities to petition multiple times for one position. Like, that's definitely illegal. But getting into the registration, I don't know that there's as many guidelines. I mean, this is very much an administrative procedure to try and boost efficiency.
Yeah, on its face, is it illegal? No, right? So a single petitioner cannot register the same person twice, right? You
Right.
can't do that. But can multiple different companies register the same person? Yes.
Yeah.
Of course, the issue is that are those different companies with different job offers, or are those or is that really one company setting up a bunch of like shell companies and subsidiaries that are filing 15 times, really not only for the same person, but in reality for the same position? Now, there's no way for USCIS to know that up front. The only way they're going to figure that out is investigations on the back end, which they do, but they do not have the manpower. It's just like the IRS, right? The IRS audits less than like 1% of all filings. So a lot of people out there know they can get away with stuff because the likelihood of getting caught is really low. And we're kind of in the same scenario. So is it on its face illegal? No. But could these people potentially get prosecuted? Yes. But is it likely? Not really, because they just don't have the manpower. So we know we're seeing people that are getting registered, and we even saw companies promoting it, guaranteeing, come with us and we guarantee you'll get selected. Of course, the only way they're guaranteeing selection is if they're registering somebody 15, 20 times. And we even saw cases of people charging the employee for it, right? Which is like, that is super shady. But again, it's all about the government's ability to actually prosecute these people and then prove it. So we kind of leave that aside, this current registration system has a lot of flaws, can clearly be abused, and it clearly was abused. So we're looking at that 308,000 and we're saying, well, not that 308, but of that 87,000, how many of those were duplicate registrations? Again, the guy bragging on Twitter, I mean, I have the screenshot of the tweet. I was registered 15 times, selected 8. Is he going to submit 8 petitions? Or is he going to submit 1? And that means there's 7 that weren't submitted. So obviously the reason we were so surprised is we think USCIS completely ignored the duplicate registration problem. The 87,500 number is based on COVID dying out, denial rates really low, and they ignored everything else, which leads me to believe there's gonna be a second lottery because they didn't compensate for it. So there's a couple numbers we were looking at to kind of figure out, well, how big is that second lottery going to be? We know last year it was 18,000, right? And that was because about 60% of the people selected submitted cases, right? So we're looking at 2 numbers, right? One is just the historical average of 101, right? That's the 5-year running average. They had to select 101 people to get to 85. So we're saying, well, what's the first potential number we can look at? Well, if they selected 87,500, we subtract that from the average 101 and we get to 14,000. And we say, well, I think it's reasonable to say that on the low end, we could see a second lottery for around 14,000 people because they historically have to select around 101 and they only selected 87,500. The upper end could maybe be as high as 35,000. And you say, well, why? Well, we're looking at 2 things. One, that on average, they tend to select around 45 to 48% of the people, right? So if we look at like what's 40% of, 308, right? You're looking at like 35 and above. But also looking at last year, right? So we know last year about 60% of those selected actually submitted petitions. Why didn't a lot submit? Probably because of a combination of duplicate filings and COVID. But this year, I don't see any reason why that same number wouldn't apply. That maybe only 60 to 70% of those selected actually apply. That other 30% is a combination of people who the job offer went away, which I think would be a smaller percentage. And then the bigger chunk of that would be duplicate registrations, right? So you're saying, well, if only 60% of those selected of that 87,500 submit cases, that means you're only going to get around 50,000 submissions, which means they're going to need another 30 to 35,000 to make up the difference. Plus, they're probably going to have to do a little bit of overage there, right? Because think about it, there's probably people who got selected 8 times the first go around and may get selected 3 times the second go around. So you're going to have this is going to be like a continuing problem with duplicate registration. Andrew, do you have any thoughts on the size of the potential second lottery?
I feel like at this point, all we can hope is that it's a decent amount for all the folks that, had their one registration and didn't get selected. But I do think that, I would bet money that we'll see a second selection of some size.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, just ignoring the duplicate registration thing, just ignoring that completely and just looking at historical numbers, they need to get around 95. I mean, 95 is the lowest they've gone with. 95, 818 is the lowest they've done in the last 5 years. The average is 101. So just looking at those numbers, it's got to be, and again, in that, 95 was with, still a sort of normal denial rate. We were looking at the previous year had been 10% denial rate. So you're saying that, like, yeah, 87,500. What are they thinking with that number? Now, again, we could be totally wrong. This whole duplicate registration thing could be completely overblown, and it's only like 5,000 out of 300,000 cases, and it turns out that there's not a second lottery, or it is, and it's smaller than we think. Personally, I think the duplicate registration thing is a bigger problem than they really suspect, based on everything we've seen. So that's why we're thinking that it could be as low as 14 based on historical data, as high as 35 based on how many duplicate registrations. Of course, the big kicker there is going to be on the duplicate registrations. I've seen plenty of chatter on places like Reddit, and I've done consultations and seen also chatter on Facebook, like from other attorneys, that there are people who are getting selected multiple times and are going to submit multiple petitions. The whole thing is like, well, I want to make sure I have the best odds possible. So both of these employers are going to submit for me, and in case one gets denied, I have the other one. I think that's pretty low, but because you're really hurting a lot of people who, a lot of them educated here, working here, did everything the right way, found an employer, did only one registration because they thought that was the right way to do it, and then find out that somebody did something super shady and hurt them. The other question is going to be, well, what are my odds then if there is a second lottery, right? Well, I mean, we can only look. I mean, there's 221,000 registrations still out there that to be selected from, and if it's 14 to 35,000, your odds are about 6 to 16%. Now, if you're part of the master's cap, it's obviously going to be a little bit higher than that. So your odds, unfortunately, are not good. I mean, it was 28% in the first go around, which is the lowest it's ever been, and probably 6 to 16%. So, unfortunately, although there is hope that there may be a second lottery, the numbers are, not the best. And here's my other question is, Angie, what do you think about this? What if there's so many duplicate registrations selected in the second lottery? Would they go to a third?
I've been wondering that. Um, and I honestly don't know if administratively, I mean, technically they have to administer those 85,000 visas, don't they? I mean, you can't just stop short and say this is entirely too much work, so we're just not going to move forward. If you sit here and run through your second lottery and still are coming up, a few thousand short, potentially I could see a third one happening.
Yeah, you never know, and you could end up with lawsuits because we've seen that they've been sued in class action lawsuits about not issuing um, all of the numbers they have for green cards, right? Because all of the Department of State effectively shut down, was not issuing any immigrant visas for like over a year, and then you had all of these unused visas, and the same thing with the diversity lottery that those people have to apply by a certain deadline, and if the government just wasn't doing it, you had all these people that got selected and were getting screwed, and that number then just goes away at the start of the new fiscal year. So obviously we had all of these lawsuits, and you could end up with the same thing if it turns out that like they never got to like the 85,000 and then just kind of left it. Now, we're going to do another follow-up video where we're going to talk about another issue in depth, but it does sort of impact our current discussion, and that is there is a proposed rule that's still on the books about changing the lottery system to a preference system. We're going to talk about that more in depth in another video, but this is one of the justifications for that. Say, look, everyone hates how this system's being gamed. There's no way for us to police that, right? Because USCIS is not going to like pre-adjudicate like employers before they even register. It's not going to happen. And so one of their justifications behind the preference system is just to say, well, then when it's no longer a lottery, people can't game the system that way anymore. But of course, again, we're going to do an in-depth video about the preference system and the pros and cons and likelihood of that actually going through. But the main point of this video is to say, do we believe there's going to be a second lottery? I would say the odds are yes. Again, we're guessing here. I mean, at this point, USCIS knows, right? Because all of the petitions were due by June 30th. And it's now July 15th. So at this point, they know how many petitions they've received. They just don't release that data. So they kind of already know. They haven't said anything to anybody yet. How big is that going to be? Our best guess, again, this is a guess, is between 14 to 35,000, largely based on the true number of duplicate registrations. Andrew, do you have any comments about the second lottery?
No, mostly just stay tuned and check your email regularly.
All I can say is, you know, if you're watching this, share the video. You know, we want to get this information out there. We also want to wish you the best of luck. If you are dying, you know, waiting to see, we hope you get selected. But always go to our website. You can schedule a consultation to come talk to us if you need to talk about this, or need to talk about what are my alternatives. You know, in terms of other options like J visas or going back to school or doing day one CPT, you know, whatever it is, right? Reach out, you know, schedule a consultation, and, you know, we can help. Look, because we know just how stressful all this can be, especially if it's your last go around. But anyway, thank you for watching this video. And again, we're here to help with whatever your immigration needs be. And thank you.